Hafidades and Mananasitus colleagues, Imina 35 na legislature in Guam is back from recess. When we last left, we were on bill number 330-35 COR. I will address the author at this time, Assistant Majority Leader, Senator Marsh Taitano. You are recognized.
Sutuas Maasi, Madam Speaker. Notwithstanding the House rules, I move to accept Bill number 330-35 as further substituted on the floor.
There's been a motion. Senator Lee, I will recognize you if you have a point of information or inquiry.
Buenas, Madam Speaker and Suzuos Maasi, and buenas colleagues. Just a point of inquiry. I just wanted to see if that, I think the retiring speaker was good enough last time to provide us with a substitute version of her bill indicating the highlighted changes. And so I just wanted to see if that's also available on our drive for the changes from the previous sub to this new sub,
Senator,
just for our reference.
Senator Lee duly noted. Senator Marsh Taitano, I will afford you that opportunity. You have that bill is further substituted on the floor, and if you have any preliminaries on what was further substituted from the accepted version on the agenda yesterday, I will allow you that right now.
Sutuas Maasi, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the question because it's an opportunity for clarity. So with this bill, as was discussed yesterday, we had further meetings with GEC last night and throughout the evening and then this morning. And so we arrived at some resolution that protects the processes that are in place and the law, and it boils down the expansion of the ability to have voting options that are safer and over a longer period of time to basically one sentence that they felt protected the integrity of the law and at the same time providing expanded voting options in as simple and straightforward a way as possible.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Marsh Taitano. Senator Lee, does that suffice? If so, there is a motion. It's not debatable on the motion to accept. Hearing no objections, motion carries. Senator Marsh Taitano, I will still recognize you.
Sutuas Maasi, Madam Speaker. I move to place the bill number 33-35 in the third reading file, and I would like to discuss it.
As further substituted. On
Yes.
that motion, please, Senator Marsh Taitano, you may proceed.
I believe that
Yes.
the one that's on the file, sorry, people are asking where it is. I believe that it's the only one in the file at this time. Is that
And I will
the
read
case?
it for the colleague, Senator Marsh Taitano. It is that version as further substituted, 330. Does everybody got it? Does everybody have? Okay. Senator San Augustine.
If we could just have a quick recess to reconfirm that we all have the exact substitute. Because there was the original and a substitute.
Yes,
Then
and
another
this is the
substitute. So we
further
want to make sure
substituted.
everybody's on the same track. Thank you.
Yes.
Just maybe a 1 or 2 minute
I will
recess.
afford that to you, Senator San Augustine. y mina 85 na legislatura en Guam is back from recess. Again, colleagues, I want to make sure that everyone has copies of the Bill 330, just 35 COR as further substituted. I want to take the time to thank the clerks for making sure that the documentation was inserted, and I'm sure that everybody has it online right now. So we're going to go ahead and proceed, and I'm going to acknowledge the Assistant Majority Leader, who's the author of the bill, Senator Marsh Taitzino. You are recognized.
Suduas Masi, Madam Speaker. I thank the Guam Election Commission for their diligence and their thoughtfulness towards expanding the safe options for our people in our community to vote in a way that also keeps the integrity of our elections from being compromised. For months, we have worked both separately and together to explore numerous options, having to calculate how systems that work elsewhere can be applied here. It has taken months of research and numerous meetings all the way until yesterday evening and this morning to get to what best takes into consideration all the factors that we have explored and considered over the last 3.5 months. So as has been the case with all the other bills about the election, this is something that they have advised on as to whether it can be implemented. Their board hasn't voted on any of our bills, just to make that clear. And that diligence that they have put towards this is something that we should demand. We should demand no less from our Guam Election Commission to watch and protect the community's voting rights and to put in the time that it takes. Well, I believe we as lawmakers need to set aside time for a fully comprehensive and deliberative update of our election processes. The current public health crisis does not allow us that luxury of time. This bill expands safe and flexible voting options for our community. This bill expands on-island absentee voting owing to a state of emergency. It does not change the Uniformed and Overseas Absentee Voting Act or the homebound absentee voting. As someone said not too long ago regarding our COVID-19 situation, we are not all in the same boat. This state of emergency and COVID-19 is hitting us differently, person by person and family by family. For some, it is lack of childcare, especially when the caregivers also need to go out and vote on the very same day. For some, it is worrying about the security of a job and not wanting to test that security by requesting time off to vote. For some, it is being more vulnerable physically and thus at more high risk. And for some, it is the worry and the stress of feeling vulnerable or exposed to conditions that could allow for the spread of COVID-19. Each of these is a real and valid effect of COVID-19. Each of these is a real and valid concern that needs to be addressed, not ignored, not minimized, and not swept under the rug. Each one of these issues mentioned can severely compromise one's democratic and sacred right to vote for their leadership, for the values that they believe in, for the principles and priorities they want to see applied in government. We are here today as elected leaders to protect that democratic and sacred right to vote by doing what we have the ability to do to provide safe, feasible, and flexible options that allow all of us, no matter what boat we are in, the ability to vote in a manner that is conducive to us while we are contending with a global pandemic. We already have enough on our plate. We already have enough concerns without unnecessarily adding to them. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is encouraging voters to use voting methods that minimize direct contact with other people. However, current law does not provide any option for Guam voters other than to go to the polls where an unknown number of people will be present. We heard yesterday from one of my good colleagues who voted in the Zotnia mayor special election, and that with all the additional personnel and with the voters present, that there had never been seen before that many people present at that polling site. This bill allows the curbside voting and the more traditional lines to be less congested, and the waiting time within them to be lessened. This bill's intent is to protect the right to vote while also expanding the options, to empower our voters, and to address the many COVID-19 related issues that they are contending with, and may impede their ability to exercise their right to vote. On-island absentee voting can allow for in-office voting over a period of several weeks so that people can be spaced out over time, although this would perhaps need to be done by appointment so that we don't run into the same situation of long lines. One can apply for absentee voting by mail, over the phone, and in person, and they will have from July 30th to August 28th to cast their votes. 8 people will be able to vote at a time in a socially/physically distanced, sterilized environment. Each of the GEC 14 staff or notaries who will be present to witness that the voting follows proper protocols. As notaries, they are legally held liable for the integrity of their actions. The ballots will each be sealed in both an affidavit envelope and an absentee ballot envelope. They will be kept in a vault and be able to be tracked by date and time. The entrance to the vault and the vault itself are monitored by security cameras to record all activity related to the security of those ballots. It is not meant to increase ability for homebound voting, which is a very labor-intensive process that should be reserved for those that are truly bedridden and otherwise homebound. Let us remember that GEC received a $600,000 grant from the CARES Act for Guam's primary and general elections during the crisis. GEC already reported in hearings that this money will be used for procurement of cleaning supplies, hiring additional staff for election days, and the purchasing of additional absentee materials. At the hearing, I asked very specifically if that $600,000 of CARES Act money would be enough to support both the potential primary and general elections, having had numerous discussions with them about a wide range of potential ways of expanding voting ability, including what we have before us today, and GEC said yes. Since we have discussed fiscal impact, GEC's spending of this CARES Act money, which will have to be returned if they do not spend all of it, helps stimulate the economy by hiring additional support staff, purchasing local supplies from local businesses, and the like. That money spent locally will have a multiplier effect as those staff spend at restaurants and stores and those companies pay taxes. I'm not saying that that should be the main concern on the swaying point here. I just wanted to point out that using the CARES Act monies will pump about $600,000 into our economy. We are receiving testimonies in person and through our office emails that there are those who feel it's important to hold the primaries. If that is the decision of this body, and we do have a primary, this bill provides the possibility of additional safety measures and other considerations related to COVID-19. Further, this bill can make the voting polls more expedient and safer themselves by minimizing the number of people who show up at those traditional polls. Voters who prefer to cast their ballots in person at poll sites are still allowed to. This bill does not change or remove that. If people are worried about changing the primary too much or the election process, this bill is the least disruptive. If people are worried primarily about their health, this bill gives them options. If people are worried about childcare, the safety of their children at polling sites, or time from work, this bill gives them options. If people are worried about the expense of a notary owing to absentee ballot voting restrictions, this bill eliminates that potential expense and that potential to be excluded because of it. If the safety, for the safety of our community which we serve, for the consideration of giving our community options of coping with this pandemic and their childcare, their employment, their worries and concerns, or other considerations, I ask my colleagues that you support this measure for them.
Thank you, Senator Marsh Teichner. On the main motion, anyone wishing to speak? Senator Torres, you are recognized. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Speaker. I would like to ask the mover of this bill. I see the substituted bill, which I had actually, in the original version, my thought was that the bill that is now being cited here is precisely what I thought was the remedy for absentee voting. And the question that I have for the author of this bill is, as I read section 10101 of chapter 10, 3 Guam Code Annotated, which is the chapter that deals with absentee voting, it reads that section 10101, conditions upon the right to vote, it begins with any qualified voter of Guam may, as provided in this chapter and subject to the conditions of this section, vote in any election by absentee ballot, or if he or she will be prevented from personally going to the polls and voting on election day. And then it gives from A to letter G the different conditions. And as just in my experience as a voting citizen on Guam, and also as a person who served on the Election Commission for many, many years, the conditions and the application that's later spelled out in section 10107 is discretionary on the Guam Election Commission. You know, you attest to why, when you're making an application for absentee voting, you attest to why you will not be present and you would like to and we used to refer to it as almost like early voting, absentee voting. You vote ahead of the election day, oftentimes. But my question is, as I read that section of the law that this bill now is addressing, it already opens it up to any qualified voter of Guam. And the conditions are so wide open and that it's really discretionary on the Election Commission to say, sure, that's a valid reason for you to want to vote now as opposed to on polling day, and permit them to fill out the application, get a ballot, and submit it at that same time. So, and sometimes the reasons are people are working the polling areas or have to care for people or whatever. The reasons can be really nothing so earth-shattering as more than a matter of convenience, perhaps to themselves or to others that they are serving at the moment. And it is discretionary on the Election Commission to say yay or nay. So what is it about this bill 330 that adds anything to what is already provided in 10101? I mean, it states right out of the gate, any qualified voter of Guam may vote by absentee ballot.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Assistant Majority Leader, would you like to yield?
Sutuas Maasi, and I appreciate the question. I too have read this section over and over and had numerous discussions about it. And that she brings, the retiring speaker brings forward an important point, that it's discretionary. What this bill does is it makes it absolutely crystal clear that it's not depending upon a particular employee's perception that day or understanding of the directive that day. And legally as well, it makes it very clear that if somebody is afforded that opportunity, it makes it clear exactly what those reasons are. I mean, in this case, it opens it up, and so it should minimize any challenges to that by taking that discretionary part out of it and saying everybody absolutely at this time during a state of emergency has that right.
Thank you. Senator Torres,
But
will that suffice?
Yeah, it doesn't suffice, and this is why the point I want to make. The Election Commission is in the business of doing everything to ensure that the right to vote is protected, that anybody who is a registered voter has the right to vote, and they make exceptions with curbside voting, absentee voting, home voting, all sorts of considerations. And so this idea that discretionary is somehow adverse to people, I meant that in the way that they almost let anything go if it's within reason. Because the idea is we're not trying to prevent people from voting. In fact, the Election Commission goes above board to make sure that everybody has that right to vote, including when, and I remember one recent election where the lines were so long, and they would accommodate who was the end of line to make sure that that person who was in line by the cutoff time made it to the precinct, even if it exceeded the hours. So the idea that people may be turned away, I think is not accurate, because I don't believe in the simple read of this and in what I understand people's experiences, including my own, where there have been a couple times where I voted absentee. I took that route to vote absentee because of circumstances, either travel or I knew I had to tend to something and couldn't make it to the poll that morning. It is not a practice of the committee. If it were a situation where we understood that people were being turned away, or the likelihood of people being turned away was real, then yes, let's make it clear. But I don't think that that's the situation. And I'll bet anything, if you were to ask Guam Election Commission, if people were to line up starting tomorrow, what would you do? Their answer would be, I would make special accommodations to ensure that everybody gets through the door and gets a chance to vote. I'll bet you that's what they're going to say. So I think that, you know, some things that are good should be left. Things that are sufficient should be well left alone. And I'm glad that the author of this bill recognized that it was about, that it was simply to, if you want to emphasize that everybody is entitled, all qualified voters of Guam should be entitled to vote absentee ballot this election. I would argue that the law very clearly states that at the top line, the opening section of that section of law, the opening line of that section of law specifically states that already. And if the GEC has demonstrated that they're not turning away voters, they're not disenfranchising people, they're not putting up barriers, in fact, they're removing barriers, then there's really no point to this, other than maybe
A point of
added
personal
work and paper.
privilege.
I didn't hear that correctly. Senator March Tachino, did you say point of personal, did she say? You stated a point of personal privilege. Please state your point of personal privilege.
Right. Well, I just, having participated in these numerous discussions and having sat down with their legal counsel and having the legal counsel provide very specific, very measured legal analysis, the speculation does not match up with his legal analysis as he has expressed it. He absolutely has felt that this act is needed for the safety and the integrity of the Guam Election Commission, and that it needs to have very particular language, the notwithstanding that section and so forth. And so this is why it has taken 3.5 months, because they have been incredibly, and I respect them for that, measured about this, not wanting to open themselves up for any misinterpretations, not wanting to open themselves up for any legal challenges. And so in my discussions with them, as I said, he had
Point of
legal
information,
analysis.
Madam Speaker, point of
Thank you.
information. This
Oh,
is not a
excuse
point of
me.
personal privilege, please.
Senator
order.
Tadegui, you are out of order, please.
Point of
Senator-
order, Madam Speaker. This is not a point of personal privilege.
And so I
My-
believe it is misrepresenting my
Senator-
discussions and my presentation of this bill.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Tights. No, Senator Torres, you still have the floor.
Madam Speaker, as is my privilege and right, I was simply stating a position of what I thought was a reason why I felt that this was not necessary. Plain and simple. And I used my own personal experience and observations as a point to make, to clarify, what my position. So, honest debate is good for the discussion, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Senator Torres. On the main motion, Senator William Castro, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I want to commend the two authors for this. I stand in support of Bill 330-35. I find it to be definitely a proposal that allows the voter ample opportunity to mitigate risk of exposure to COVID-19. And above all else, Madam Speaker, I believe that this strengthens the primary process and not throw it out altogether. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Senator Castro. On the main motion. On the main motion. Nobody else on the main motion. Senator Therese Terlaye, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'm wondering if we could allow the Guam Election Commission to come in and answer a few questions. For example, I want to know if they're able to accommodate any line that might form starting tomorrow immediately, or whether it's going to or they're going to put rules in place that we're not aware of right now, such as only by appointment or other restrictions.
Are you saying that in the motion, Senator Terlaye?
Sure.
It is a motion. Is there an objection?
I do have a point, and I suppose it has
Senator
to be.
Senator Taitano, if I may.
Yes,
Senator Terlaye had a floor.
Yes, and so it's a
Senator
reluctant objection.
Taitano, please. Please,
It's-
you are
it's-
out of order right now,
It's an
please.
objection?
Senator Taitano, one moment, please. There was a motion on the floor. If you're raising an objection, I will go ahead and call for the vote. It is not a debatable motion. I apologize. I can't hear it clearly. Is that an objection? Colleagues, there was a motion that was put on the floor as accepted by Senator Therese. There is an objection.
Madam Speaker, I would withdraw my motion and instead pose it as a question to the author, an inquiry to the author
So please
at
state
this
your
point.
question again.
The question is, this language does
I
not...
apologize for the interruption. Point of order, Madam Speaker. I believe that she had a motion that was withdrawn, so you need to gavel down so she can proceed.
On the, I do apologize. On the motion to withdraw, are there any objections? Hearing none, motion carries. On the motion of inquiry, go ahead and please state your
Thank you, Madam
question again.
Speaker. The bill is not clear. We're allowing the Guam Election Commission to accept walk-in or, in-office voting pursuant to 10107. However, the statute says they can come in at any time, and I want to be sure that that is going to be available to the voters, or if Guam Election Commission is going to be putting restrictions on access to their offices, such as only by appointment, and like what we've seen at Revenue and Taxation.
Thank you, Senator Terlaye. Senator Taitano, would you like to yield?
So, Justice Maasi, Madam Speaker. Yes, so with what is currently available online, they do talk about coming in during regular business hours from July 30th to August 28th. And so there are already some outlines, but there are considerations going both ways. They are looking at expanding the hours so that they can accommodate more people. For safety protocol measures, they will work with public health to perhaps implement something like appointment, but again, it would be for the safety of those that are attending and to make best use of their time.
Thank you, Senator Taitano. Senator Chalayi, you still have the floor. Does that suffice?
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and thank you to the author for yielding. In principle, I support this bill that it says it's going to allow, without any restriction, you don't have to meet any other criteria except to be a qualified voter, to allow those voters to walk into the Guam Election Commission office and be given a ballot and subscribe to the application anytime 30 days prior to the election, except for that 1 day. From 30 to 1 day prior to the election, you can come into the office. And you're going to have to vote immediately, and you're going to have to swear or sign an. Your vote and your signature would have to be notarized with an affidavit. So I think the protections are in place for this process. My concerns were that it says at the office of said commission. And so I just echoing the concerns of some of the previous speakers, I want to make sure that if we're going to open this up for the commission is going to readily accept. I hate for Manamco to make the trip thinking they're going to go down there to vote and be turned away and told they have to come back at another time. And so I'm wondering, the Guam Election Commission was very adept at expanding their office space to allow us during this COVID period candidates to file safely. They kind of extended it to another parts of the building, and I've seen them do this, different times. So they move their office around, and I support that. If they're going to be expanding this outside the building, I guess I would really just like to know the details. I think it's important whether they would be expanding their office to GIGO, for example, because that might change the dynamics of the election if they do GIGO and not another village, or if they do only by appointment and not just open walk-in. I guess I want to know, are they opposed to an open walk-in process? And if the author would yield to that, can we make that a restriction that they can advocate for appointments, but if people walk in, that they should be able to accommodate them as well?
Thank you, Senator Terlahi. Senator Taitano, would you like to yield?
Suduas Masi, Madam Speaker, and to the proffer of the question, because it is important that we look at this thoroughly. So they have discussed in those expanded hours having Manamco hours from perhaps 9 to 11, not that they would be turned away at any other time, and that they are looking at by appointment, again, for the safety protocol, but there has been no discussion that they would turn someone away if one of those 8 seats is, seats or capacities is open. So they've really worked at expanding this option, that it will be 8 people at a time. They can do 8 people every 20 minutes, and they can do this over a period of 10 hours a day is what they're looking at. So they're really working to increase it to large degrees.
Thank you, Senator Taitano. Senator Therese.
All right, thank you to the author for yielding to that question. And so again, Madam Speaker, this bill will allow persons on Guam who are qualified to vote without an advance request to the commission to go to their office and immediately vote 30 days prior to the election, or within the 30 days prior to the election, as long as they are able to swear on an affidavit, and the commission's notary will be present to notarize that affidavit. And so on its face, without having any other people here to discuss this procedure with us, how it's really going to be set up, I support that as an additional measure to try to reduce crowds at the actual polling places on election day. I just hope that they can put in the measures that can keep people safe who are going to be utilizing this process.
Buen provecho, Senator Teresa Lai. On the main motion, anyone wishing to speak on the main motion? Senator Joseph Augustine, I will acknowledge you.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support. I'm a co-author of the, co-sponsor of the bill. Number one, as I've spoken to the Guam Election Commission, because I call them quite often being the oversight chair, they have expressed that they have the ability. They can expand within the building they're at, which includes the arcade, because that's the compound. When you're in a space there, it's inclusive of every part of the building, to include the parking lot. And they have expressed that they can do this, provided that we lift the restriction from what it is today. That's all this bill does, is lift the restriction. You don't have to go in there and say, here's my ticket, I'm flying, or here, I'm sick, I need to vote. Anybody can vote. If we take an estimate of 8 individuals within 20 minutes, divide that into the 10 hours, we come up to about 300 people a day. So the numbers are perfect. 300 times 30 days, it's quite a few voters. So I expect this to be a success. And exactly like the previous speaker has mentioned, it's to curb the COVID. That's all it's all about, helping to curb. That's why this bill was introduced. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
You're very welcome, Senator San Augustine. Anyone else on the main motion? Anyone else on the main motion? If not, Senator Regine Visco-Lee, I will acknowledge you.
Sudos Masi, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I rise in support of Bill 330 as further substituted on the floor, and I believe that allowing alternative ways for the public to vote is absolutely the right path forward, whether it be, absentee ballots, mail-in ballots, or what's being contemplated here, early in-office voting. We should really be asking ourselves, what's next? What's our next step? What can we do to further mitigate the risk to our people's health and still strike that balance in upholding this very basic pillar of our democracy? Madam Speaker, we were already told by the Guam Election Commission that if the primary election is canceled, the possibility of a runoff for our delegate race is high. We are already told that any cost savings we previously thought would be realized will be offset by, the cost of a second election anyway. So we have to continue to ask ourselves, what's next? What can we do right now with all of the information that we've received, all of the information that's been presented to us? So by allowing our community to vote by absentee ballot or in-office voting in any election under the state of emergency, so in this bill it's the 2020 primary and the 2020 general election, we can certainly minimize the number of people on election day at any given village polling site. We can provide our people with this safer option to either, if they choose vote by mail, or afford the traditional option to those who wish to do so. So in this way, Madam Speaker, the bill attempts to front load the expected number of voters to a safer option. Madam Speaker, this bill is the result of a concerted effort from this body and the Guam Election Commission to reach a resolution that mitigates the risk to our community and still strikes a balance in upholding our democracy. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness and the research and the time that was put into this bill. It didn't make a lot of headlines. It's not, often discussed on talk radio, but this is the actual solution to the problem that's before us. And with that, I certainly want to thank the prime sponsor of the bill for rolling up her sleeves and actually working with the Guam Election Commission, with their legal counsel, with the executive director, and also with our colleagues. Many of us have raised concerns with this bill previously, and many of those concerns have been addressed. To be able to come up with the solution to an important issue. I think the substitute version of 330 provides us with a safer way for our people to exercise their right to vote, while also providing a way that doesn't delay or change GEC's current processes, and that was a concern of mine. This bill addresses the unintended consequences that we've been discussing throughout our session. It provides a safe option for our people to vote amid public health emergency. It provides the least disruptive way for the Guam Election Commission to administer a primary election, and it provides our community the opportunity to uphold the integrity of our elections. So, Madam Speaker, while there were previous arguments made to disregard the consequences of moving forward with canceling the primary election, I want to stress to this body that very good notion goes against what we are all elected to do. This is our job, and we need to take those consequences very seriously and work hard to find solutions for them. And that's exactly what Bill 330 does. And so I rise in support of this measure, and I urge my colleagues to do the same. Sijus Masi.
Sijus Masi, Senator Lee. Senator Amanda Shelton, you are recognized.
Sijus Masi, Madam Speaker, and I too rise in support of this bill and thank the authors of this bill for thinking during this time of the COVID crisis about our safety and about steps for us to preserve the right of the people to vote, as well as think about the safety of our community. And with that, Madam Speaker, I have an amendment to offer, which has been uploaded to the drive. And there was a little bit of discussion about this during the public hearings earlier this week on the primary election bills, where we talked about satellite voting centers so that we can limit the crowds that will come in for in-office voting. I know that some of our colleagues just spoke about concerns about having our manamku lining up around the building. We've seen these lines at our stores, at the banks, at the post office over the last few months. And we want to make voting as easy and as accessible and as safe as possible. And as we all know, the virus is not going away in August at the primary election, and it's going to still be here in November when we have to go to the polls to vote in November for the general election. And so, Madam Speaker, I'd like to offer this amendment to allow the Guam Election Commission to expand in-office voting by creating satellite voting centers throughout the island. And if all of our colleagues have access to it, it is in the drive. It is an amendment for line 11, page 2, to amend section 2 of the bill to read, Section 2, permitting absentee voting for all qualified voters. Notwithstanding 3 GCA Section 10101, any qualified voter of Guam may vote in the 2020 primary and general elections during the 30-day in-office absentee voting period as provided in 3 GCA Section 10107. And now to add, notwithstanding the Administrative Adjudication Law, 5 GCA Chapter 9, and Guam Procurement Law, 5 GCA Chapter 5, the Guam Election Commission shall expand in-office voting for the 2020 general election to prevent large congregations by creating satellite voting centers in no less than 3 voting districts, no later than 30 calendar days before the 2020 general election date. And Madam Speaker, as the author of the bill mentioned, the Guam Election Commission has received money from the CARES Act for response to the coronavirus emergency, and so they do have funds, federal funds available to them to open up these satellite voting centers and to staff these satellite voting centers. And really this is about the safety of our people to prevent and minimize crowds forming. So we hope that 30 days prior to the election, people will get out during the day, vote early, go into the village, and vote. I'm also concerned about access to transportation and all the different vulnerabilities that have been mentioned in the last couple of days and protecting our community. So I'd like to offer this amendment to the bill to further protect the health of our island residents. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Shelton. Senator Taitano, you're recognized on the amendment.
Siduous Masi, Madam Speaker, and I thank the retiring speaker for her also just really trying to have these discussions, be thoughtful, and look out for our community. And while I personally support the idea of voting centers, in fact, I would like to work on legislation for that with her and support her. Having these 3.5 months with the Guam Election Commission, they have not thoroughly vetted this. They have not had legal opinion on it. They find themselves having to really thoughtful about what these things mean for them legally. And so while I personally support the idea, as I mentioned, and I think there is potential for it, I cannot support it being added to this bill without some real discussion with the Guam Election Commission and some legal analysis to make sure that they as a body are protected and our entire democratic process is protected.
Thank you, Senator Taitano. On the main amendment, Senator Minority Leader, you're recognized, and then Senator Will Castro.
Siduous Masi, Madam Chair, and Madam Speaker, with regards to this. It's very sensitive, and understanding how the author had to make quite a bit of changes on the original bill, and in conversation yesterday with the director of the Guam Election Commission, the sensitivity is in litigation and issues that may arise. But this particular amendment, Madam Speaker, I do not support because, well, first, there's not enough time for them to do it. Secondly, I had the opportunity to send this to the Guam Election Commission, this particular amendment, and they too have mentioned there is not enough time to do it, and they are not able to do it as well. So I have to object to this as well.
Thank you, Minority Leader. Anyone else on the amendment? Senator Luis Muñoz. I apologize, Senator Luis. I did offer the opportunity for Senator Will Castro first. Senator Muñoz.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I also have some concerns about this amendment, just in the security of the ballot boxes alone. Just like before hours, after hours. I would also like to consult maybe with the Guam Election Commission to see, you know, what the security of the ballot boxes would be as well. And if, since we don't have that communication with them at this moment, I would also, I'm not in support of this amendment as well. Thanks, Madam
Thank you,
Speaker.
Senator Muñoz. Senator Castro? On the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I rise in support of this amendment that would strengthen the original measure. I just want to commend the author of the amendment for yet another proposal to approve upon the status quo. I find it to be innovative. I think it addresses the issue of the virus head on. It addresses not just the virus, but it addresses issues of accessibility in terms of distance. And ultimately, in my opinion, ultimately it helps to preserve and keep our democratic process intact. I don't think this would add an additional hindrance, Madam Speaker. In my opinion, it's a value-added option that helps to maintain a fair and equal playing field. I also think it lends strength to Senator Marsh's proposition that will preserve the rights of qualified candidates to campaign on their declared partisan affiliation, but also extends the rights to voters to exercise additional precautions based on their public health and safety. By doing so, it also preserves their rights to choose their candidate based on ideology and affiliation. So thank you, Senator Amanda Shelton. Thank you for working so that we don't have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Sijus Masi.
Buen provecho, Senator Castro. We do have several people who wish to speak. I will go ahead and address Senator Mary Torres at this time on the amendment. I have about 5 other speakers after that. So, Senator Torres on the amendment.
Madam Speaker, I'll pass. My concern was already raised.
Thank you, Senator Torres. Senator Biscoli.
Sujos Masi, Madam Speaker. I have an inquiry for the proffer of this amendment, if she yield.
Please state your question.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was just concerned with the cost, number one, and then also if the Guam Election Commission would have enough time to be able to implement it. And then I, took another moment and reread her floor amendment, and it looks like it's prospective. It's for not for the primary, but for the general election only. And so I just wanted to ask the mover of this amendment if she would maybe discuss a little bit about where this money would come from and the timing of it, because I think 30 days before a primary is going to be a little bit of a challenge to stand this up. But I reread the floor amendment and it's specific to the general only. So I just wanted to give her an opportunity to speak on that.
Sijus Masi, Senator Lee. Senator Shelton, Legislative Secretary, would you like to yield?
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I thank my colleague for the questions. As I mentioned while introducing this amendment, it is my hope that the Guam Election Commission will utilize the CARES Act funding that they received, about $600,000, to stand up these satellite voting centers. And in the amendment, I included that there shall be no less than three voting centers in different voting districts. And so that's my hope for them to put a satellite voting center in the north, in the central, and in the south to create more accessibility to our residents who are, trying to practice social distancing, trying to do their part and stay home. And with regards to the timing, so in the amendment, I've provided that they have up until 30 days before the 2020 general election date. And I know that I would love to see voting centers pop up before the primary election next month, but that's really unrealistic, and I think it would be a huge burden on the Election Commission to try to figure out those logistics. And so with that in mind, I have included the the date for the general election. So this would not be for the primary election. This would be for no later than 30 days before the 2020 general election in at least 3 locations throughout the island. So it would be nice if we could afford and have the resources to put them in every single village. But I think starting out with 3, at least in the north, central, and south, is a good effort on our part and something very doable for the commission. I have the full confidence in them to be able to look at this timeline for today up until 30 days of our November election to carry this out.
Point
Thank
of
you.
information, since I have had discussions last night, it's very specific to answering whether they have time or not. We discussed this yesterday evening, and there are some real grave concerns whether they will have time to consider it. The board has not looked at this officially, but first and foremost, since we're talking about time, they have real grave considerations from yesterday to the general elections, whether they will be able to put something together, because they have to be so thoughtful, so deliberate, so protective of our rights to vote, of the security of those ballots. And even though there may be interest of people, it may be a good option, they have really expressed their concern that they do not have time. And then again, I would really worry that there are false expectations created because it says may, that people would pressure them when they cannot.
Senator Taitino duly noted. Senator Lee, on the answer from the legislative secretary, does that suffice? You still have the floor.
Sujos Masi, Madam Speaker, and I appreciate the very thoughtful response from the mover of this amendment. I agree that I think it's very innovative, especially given our current challenges. There are a couple of things that I'm still trying to work through on my end, so I just ask if it's possible, if I could reserve the balance and possibly have the opportunity to ask an additional question at a later time. Sujos Masi, Madam Speaker, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator Lee. And we also have Senator Jose Piro Talahi on the amendment. You are recognized.
Madam Speaker, on the amendment utungua na maulik izuna amendment lo tanisisita o mekungu hafay liligna I sponsor the bill. I cuestiona gwini esta masangana ni Guam Election Commission that they can handle the in-house voting, no? 30 days before the general election. Ejigi asangan promoponis din na bill. Maulika esti amendment jangyan touristi siya na cuestiona I tafafasin esti na amendment tanisisita man mangwentos dan election commission ko sino man siguro managwaha talo o true voting gi todo I distrito. Sa jangin sigya tanai chocho I Guam Election Commission na estige manalagota estige tarikomenda tanisisito mekungi gi Guam Election Commission ko sina ma akudi esti na klasin amendment. Just legna Election Commission na in-house di pursi sina machogwi. Asangan na si Senator San Agustin na ni asangan siya minagetaw ni Max Pepikta po fanalom na sina ha 300 makudi gidi menos na tempo. Zamasaya unggan maulik jangingwaha otru banda siya talo ta proponi para pamausap pa election lo sita ta comprendi na timege sempi na tautong 30 days before election sa sempi manisisita majustifika hafay rason jangin po fanano titoru jana megay tautaw po fanano para Amerika pat titoru jana maulik pa manamko 20 Lo leliko na sige tanai so election commission za usangana gini gi alatsa. Na the election commission is pressed with the timeline. Za jangin sige ta man mamatina si decision gini para Pomachogwi ni election commission masaya esta iligna na guahas lapi firirat po halom da sina man manahir tau. Lo sita tali election commission ufanhano do maspiay lugar. Sita election commission maspiay tau ni sina makudi este na tsotso. Ja nangatsa na besangan na i-sponsor gini na bill esta reconisa todo y checho necesita machogui. Pues eso le digo na tu sopoputis tin amendment sa chocho talos ti pa Guam Election Commission za jangin tanisisita claro gin Election Commission cocina machogui cocina masoda y tempo ni para machogui sti financiación pago. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Buen provecho, Senator Terlahi. Senator Therese Terlahi, you are recognized on the amendment.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the author of this amendment. It's another idea that was suggested by the Guam Election Commission at their April or May, I think May 15 hearing. When we were talking about this bill, we had asked her, and we've asked her maybe for months, what are other ways that we can that we can utilize to make the elections safer. And as I said yesterday, these are the same inquiries that are going on across the nation. But unfortunately, this particular proposal did not have its own public hearing, and I would like for the Election Commission to be here and to answer if we're going to pursue it, because it has merit. And but however, I wouldn't want to support it without knowing exactly what options they are looking at. Like, for example, what 3 precincts and how that would work, and exactly how, what that might look like. At least options of what it might look like. I also, the part I would like, I did not support in the amendment is the waiver of the procurement law. I think we should keep that in, and if they can justify that it is an emergency or that it needs to be done in an expedited manner, they should be able to do that, especially if this is only for the general election and not for the primary. So I just don't want to support a waiver of that procurement law. Also, I think, that the author highlights that trying to implement something like this before the general may be still feasible. It gives the Election Commission time to figure out really what this might look like and whether it's really feasible given the challenges that they are currently facing. So, even the primary, they're facing a lack of people available to serve as precinct officials, despite even considering raising the incentive or raising the pay or something that they were hinting that they might do in order to attract more and to fill the 150 slots plus the 30 slots that they've had open for a while already. And but I do believe it is consistent with the Guam Election Commission's, repeated, telling us that the more time they have to prepare, the more safety protocols they feel like they would be able to put in place, and the more training they will be able to do for these precinct officials that get hired, so that they carry out the mandate for the first time for a lot of them. Actually, with the safety precautions, it will be pretty much for the first time for all of them at this point. But it highlights that, even, if you debate between a primary and a runoff, that putting it later instead of sooner gives them more time to prepare. And I think that's consistent with what the Election Commission wants. So I support that part, that we're going to put it in for November. I just think it kind of shows that the primary, we're going to be still vulnerable to those long lines and the intense crowds and a very, very short time to prepare. But otherwise, yeah, I support continued look at creative options. However, we need to hear from the Election Commission whether they can support these. So if we're going to go forward with this amendment, I would move that we bring the Election Commission in here to Committee of the Whole to answer what this might look like for them, or if they could implement it.
Senator Terlai, is that another motion?
Yes.
There has been a motion put on the floor to go into the Committee of the Whole. Is there an objection?
Wait,
There's Senator San Augustine
Madam Speaker,
on a point of information.
I know it's non-debatable, it's vote or not, but I think her statement was very clear. If we're going to continue on, then we can go to Committee of the Whole. We haven't gone that far yet. There's quite others that might want to speak. I mean, let's all speak, then call the Committee of the Whole.
Good. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
There is an objection on the floor. All those in favor to go into the Committee of the Whole, please signify by raising your hand. Motion fails. Okay, Senator Joe San Augustine, on the amendment, you are recognized, sir.
Madam Speaker, I'd like to proffer an amendment, a very simple amendment, and if you need it in writing, I can get it to you real quick. On where it says the Guam Election Commission shall change, strike out, and put may. Everybody's questioning, all my colleagues are questioning, can they do it? Well, do they have enough time? Do they have enough money? Can they meet all the security requirements? Would there be any, whatever the threat? I spoke to the Guam Election Commission just a few minutes ago, and the may gives them an opportunity to take a look at it. I understand that exactly what my colleague brought up. Maybe it should be a separate bill. That will be it will be considered if it fails here. But just changing the word from shall to may. Always in the past, in all the bills, when we change the shall to may, all it asks for is giving the opportunity to take a look at it. See what they can do. If they can do it, they'll do it. If they can't, they can't. And then we move on. Thank you.
Thank you. There has been an amendment to the Legislative Secretary's main amendment. Are there any objections? Any minority leader on the amendment, on the Joe San Augustine amendment to Senator Amanda's main proposal?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this is an amendment to the amendment to change from shall to may. It's still a Band-Aid to fix. This is not something, it's already by text. I mean, most of us here in this body has contacted the Guam Election Commission, and they clearly stated to me that it can't be done. This is too late in the ballgame to do it. They're unable to do it. So by just putting shall to may is supposed to make it all okay? No, it doesn't. So I object.
Thank you, Senator Tairigui. Anyone else on the amendment to the amendment? If not, Senator Joe, would you like to close or call for the vote? There's an objection.
We'll just call for the vote, Madam Speaker. Thank you.
Yes, there has been an objection to the amendment to Senator Amanda's main amendment. All those in favor of Senator Joe's amendment, please signify by raising your hand. Motion carries. On the Legislative Secretary's amendment as amended, anyone else wishing to speak? Senator Sabina Perez, you are recognized.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I think when we, looking at our emergency session, we looked at these three different bills, and I guess I'll just go to this bill particularly. I think, these bills are about protecting the sanctity of our elections. And I think to start off, I guess with this amendment, it's I don't support it, for one, because, well, first of all, I support the intent. You know, I think it's important that we need to encourage more voting. You know, and I'm sure that if people were to see the long lines, it really would deter people from having to go and exercise their right. And, you know, and we're dealing with COVID. I think it's very important that we provide opportunities for the population to do it as safely as possible. So I do appreciate the effort to provide and also provide a solution for satellite voting centers. The part that I don't agree with is the, you know, the not complying with Guam Procurement Law. I don't see why that has to happen. You know, there is emergency procurement still is available. There should be no disregard of procurement law, and we already see what happened in our government when we did that. You know, there's issues that haven't been resolved, and you know, to have that tied to something that is a right for everybody here, to kind of mar that process, I think, you know, we need to kind of distance ourselves from that, and you know, ensure that the laws are being followed at a very, you know, vulnerable, you know, it should be protected. And I think, you know, if by loosening some of the restrictions regarding the laws that are in place, you know, it really can cast doubt on the election process. And this is something, you know, I think could be an unintended consequence of this particular amendment. And, you know, that's why I do not support this amendment unless that area is actually struck. I mean, you know, in hearing the sponsor of the bill, she raised, you know, many reservations about this amendment, and I think, you know, I respect all the diligence that she took to craft her bill, and I think it's important to, you know, if we are to proceed with satellite centers, I think it should be a separate bill, and not added on without the, you know, the due diligence of checking with the Guam Election Commission. So I support the satellites. I just don't support it being in an amendment to this bill, you know, with considering, you know, with the sensitivity of the author of this bill. I think, you know, it makes sense to not have it be part of the bill. But you know, I think also, you know, the idea of time, right, and resources. You know, the Guam Election Commission is gearing up for the primary election, and you know, they're working really hard at it. And to add this other task to it, I think it's, you know, we really need to hear from them to see if this is something that, you know, they can handle on top of everything else that they're doing. And I think, you know, the initial bill is in itself is, you know, is a step. It's a step on how we are going to adapt to COVID. I think, you know, it's important that we take these steps, but in regards to this particular amendment, I would have to oppose it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Sabina. Senator March Titano, I will acknowledge you on the amendment as amended.
Seduce Maasi, Madam Speaker. I do have a point of inquiry.
Please state your question, and who would you like to address it to?
The author of the amendment is, I know that there have been some discussions with the executive director of the Guam Election Commission, but has the Guam Election Commission legal counsel, do we know that they have evaluated this amendment? And what the legal counsel's position is then?
Thank you, Senator Titano. Legislative Secretary, would you like to yield to that?
Sure, Madam Speaker. No, I've had discussions with the Guam Election Commission and not specifically with the legal counsel.
We are going to take a break and be back at 2 o'clock. Yes.
I would ask that, again, that we allow the Guam Election Commission to come in after lunch if we are going to come back to discuss this bill further.
Is that in motion form,
Yes,
Senator
Madam Speaker,
Terlai? Make the
notwithstanding the
motion,
rules.
please.
Yes, notwithstanding the rules, I move that we proceed into the Committee of the Whole, allow the Guam Election Commission representatives to come to answer our questions.
There is a motion on the floor. Again, is there an objection? Is there an objection to the motion? There is an objection. All those in favor to bring the Election Commission in, signify by raising your hand. 2, 4, 5, 6, 7. Motion carries. We will take a break to 2 o'clock.